And today we have a really special guest, and we actually met through one of our advisors at Oakland Digital. His name is Wayne Sutton, who I believe was in Forbes as one of the top 25 African-American technologists. And he brought us to a place called Twitter. And we happened to meet not only the first African-American engineer at Twitter, we also met our guest today. His name is Justin Washington. He started off at Microsoft as an intern, which is pretty cool. Doing things he probably didn't want to do, but he did that. Then he actually went to a company called Yahoo, which is an IPO company. And then he went to a company called Apple and worked there for a little under 4 years. iOS software QA engineer, QA quality assurance. He'll tell you what engineers do. And then he landed at where we met, at Twitter. And this was, I think, 2 months ago. And it wasn't necessarily even Twitter that really connected us. It was his love for music, our similar friends, and also his love for diversity and technology, which I think is a big deal. And so we really meshed on different levels. So let's welcome Justin Washington from Twitter.
Thank you, Shaun.
Yeah,
how y'all doing? What's up? How y'all doing? All right, listen, I know it's early. Like, can we get a little energy, okay? Can y'all talk back to me, okay? Okay, cool. Can I hear y'all say, let's go?
Let's go.
Say, let's go.
Let's go.
Say, let's get it.
Let's get it.
All right, cool. We here. Strapping young lad here. Man, look at my jacket, man. What is this going? It's like a 3X, and I was, 5 and like 3 foot, whatever. No, this is me. I'm from Detroit originally. Some interesting pictures. I was at my aunt's wedding. Cass Tech. Okay, I went to Renaissance. That's the better high school in Detroit. The best high school. She went to the.
One of my mentors did.
Oh, okay. Cool, awesome. From Detroit, Michigan. I started off. Well, let me back up 1 second. I'll give you all a little an agenda for today. This is not a really technical talk. This is purely conversational. I'm going to give you my background and what I've done in tech, and where I'm from, and how I've kind of moved around and shifted and networked and made my way in my tech career, and what I've learned. And with design, and you guys are graphic design students, talk a little bit about design and what I've seen in the real world as far as like mobile devices that are concerned. And then I'll talk about just problems I've had to overcome, and how, as an engineer, how I've had to interact with designers on the job, different problems I've seen, and then how it relates to you guys, how code is important in design, and how that's a skill that you may want to develop and get into, make you more marketable. And open it up for questions, and we can just wrap, and you can talk to me, you can have conversation. Really informal, super informal. I'm your peer, I'm not your professor, so we can make this super friendly. All right, so back to this handsome guy. From Detroit, originally born and raised in Detroit City. I don't know what you guys see in the news about Detroit a lot, but it's actually a lot like Oakland. I got into technology or tech, I think, around middle school. We had people come in, for career day, and they're like, hey, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? And I picked up from, I guess, friends and parents that engineers and architects made a lot of money. So I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna be an engineer. I'm gonna be an architect. We make X amount of money, X amount of dollars a year. So that's what I'm gonna do. Had no context into, the nitty gritty of what they really do. I was just kind of focused on that. And then in high school, I was good at math and science. I was getting good grades. I knew the University of Michigan had a great engineering program. So in high school, I just kind of settled into thinking like, hey, I like video games. I like computers. I like computer games. I like technology. I like mobile technology. I think it's the future. I think I'll have a career and a job there when I graduate. Why not do engineering? So did that, or kind of settled that in my mind. And this is where I ended up. This is the big house, Michigan. Man, I miss it just looking at that. Man, that's crazy. Look at that. That's crazy. So crazy. Man, so this is University of Michigan. I came here 2007, graduated in 2010. Man, the football atmosphere at the University of Michigan is just super crazy live. I mean, the history there, I don't know how much you guys know, but is the culture there is just infectious, and it's awesome. It's awesome. I think at the University of Michigan, I got the best of both worlds in going to a school where sports and extracurriculars were valued just as highly and respected as the academic prowess and, you know, the prestige of academic excellence. So that was cool. I had a great 4 years at Michigan. So my freshman year came in, majored in computer science, engineering. Didn't know, had no clue what I was getting myself into. Freshman year was such a grind because I was coming in with kids that were coding and have been, you know, doing that stuff since they were 5 and 6 and 7 years old. So it was just like, all right, like, what do I do? You know, I'm just a black kid from Detroit. Like, I like computers halfway, I think, I don't know. And they're just whizzing through it. So there was automatically that that displacement of skill and, you know, history that I had to grind through and muscle through. But thankfully, at the end of freshman year, y'all know who this guy is, right? Yeah. That's my homie, Bill Gates. The summer after freshman year, I got an internship with Microsoft. So, you know, you just think, like, me, you know, not having any development experience, not having, you know, the slightest clue of what I'm getting into, you know, my freshman year in college, and right off the bat, I'm working for one of the biggest, best software companies in the world. And that's a product of what I attributed to God's grace and, you know, just networking and meeting people at the right place at the right time. But that freshman year, that summer, I interned at Microsoft, and I was on the Exchange team. So the email and service. You guys know about Outlook? Outlook, okay. Yeah. So that team. And I did a program called the Explorer program, and it basically allowed freshmen and sophomores to cycle through the 3 different technical positions that they have: program manager, software developer and test, and software developer engineer. So we got to get a taste of all the positions that they offered. And you guys remember Windows Vista? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So yeah, a little ancient times. And they had like a sidebar on the desktop where they had gadgets and little widgets you could put there. So my team developed a little gadget that went on the desktop that tracked bugs that were assigned to different team members on that team. So when I was in school, I was learning C++ programming language, and then I got here, and I wasn't using C++ at all. It was my first introduction to web programming, HTML, JavaScript. And it's funny because, you know, I was just talking to Shaun about being thrown in the fire, you know, and I was here, and I got this big internship, and I'm super excited, and I'm thinking like, yeah, I'm about to learn everything I learned in school, put it together, and they're like, no, you're gonna do this. So it was back at square one, you know, working with people that have been doing this for years, and, you know, I'm just like, what do I do? But that kind of process has refined me and just stripped away fear. I mean, I still get nervous, you know, in a lot of different aspects, but, you know, you just getting thrown in the fire is such a great thing, because, you know, you just come out and you're so much better, and, you know, everything you thought you were, you know, is just kind of thrown out the door. And you learn. It forces you to strip away pride and to get into a place where you're like, okay, you know, I'm a student, and I'm always a student. No matter if I'm in the classroom or outside the classroom, or I'm working for this company or that company, I'm always a student. So that summer was awesome. I actually got to meet Bill Gates at his house, which was crazy. It was the last summer they were doing that for interns. We had a big barbecue at his house, and I'm telling you, like, Bill Gates' house is like 10 blocks long. Like, I mean, it's just like nuts. You walk in rooms and they adjust the temperature to your body temperature. Like, it was crazy. It was crazy. But it was a good time. Great summer. So sophomore year, you guys know who This lady is? No? Yep, Marissa Meyer. She's the CEO of Yahoo. Like Shaun mentioned, after my sophomore year, I interned at Yahoo. She wasn't the CEO then. Okay. She wasn't the CEO then. There was a guy named Jerry Yang. You guys see that? Okay. Still? Oh yeah, right. Forgot about that. Yeah. Cool technology. So she wasn't the CEO then, but I interned at Yahoo my sophomore year. I was working on the Yahoo Messenger client. You guys ever use that? Instant Messenger client? Yeah, so I was doing that. So once again, I'm learning one language in school for CS, but I came here and I'm working in C#. I'm working in XML, language called XSL, Transform, some web kind of native kind of stuff. I know I'm being recorded, so I don't want to say the wrong thing. Once again, just thrown in the fire, like doing things that I wasn't doing before. So I'm at square one. I'm thinking like, man, like, yeah, I can't transfer anything I've learned. But it's funny because at Microsoft, I got that HTML experience, and I was able to take what I learned from there, and use it here. And that sophomore year, I kind of skipped ahead. It was my worst year in college. Like, I was on academic probation. After my internship at Microsoft, obviously you think like you're on top of the world, and you're like, my future is written. Like, I'm good. My ticket is here. Like, I'm on my way, you know. And I interviewed again. They didn't hire me back, so I was crushed. Like, I was crushed. And that sophomore year I was taking all the hard classes. It was horrible. And the end of the year, top it all off, my girlfriend cheated on me. So I was just like, it was right before finals. So it was just like, world was just going down. I planned on that summer just going to Best Buy and working at Geek Squad, like, you know. So you go from Microsoft and then you go into retail and Best Buy. It's like, people are like, what happened? But thankfully, like I met a guy that was, he was doing what I'm doing right now with you guys. And I'm like, man, it's the end of the year. I know internships are filled. I did this, I did that. I know this. Can you help me out? And they helped me out. So I got that internship. I was in Sunnyvale. It was my first internship out here in California. It was an awesome experience. Am I talking too fast for you guys? Are you good? Okay, cool. See, I know this guy, right? This is my uncle Steve. Rest in peace. That's my man's. So 2009, interned at Apple. First internship at Apple. Came back out here to California. Super geeked, super juiced. I was on the Pro Apps User Pubs team. So basically doing the web documentation for Final Cut Pro, Logic Pro. You guys know those applications. And that was cool because I'm a music head, and I got to kind of get in that realm and that team and see what they do. And once again, not using what I learned in school, but that web programming experience that I learned at Microsoft and at Yahoo carried over here. So I was doing, this was my first introduction, or my second introduction to web programming, and I was doing a lot of HTML and CSS and cleaning up code. I was doing a lot of cleaning up code. And I'll talk about that later when I talk about design and code. But I handled and did a lot of QA, which is what I do now. The code that ran the web documentation, which is on documentation.apple.com, for those products. And it was awesome. It was a great experience. I came back to Apple, which I'll say in the next slide, but funny experience with Steve. So I actually met him on the elevator, and when you work at Apple, like, they tell you, if you see Steve Jobs, don't say anything to him because he's gonna kill you, and blah blah blah. You know, they just really indoctrinate fear, like, because Steve in his history, he's known to be like militant, no nonsense, no BS kind of guy. So I'm walking into the building that I worked in, the second internship, which is the main building. It was IL1, and on the fourth floor, which is the executive floor. So my team was on that floor, and I'm walking in the building from lunch. I'm on the phone. I'm talking to whoever, one of my friends. And then I see Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive. You guys know Johnny Ive. So they're walking in, and I see them walking behind me, like approaching the elevator. So I'm like, oh, shoot, let me call you back. Hang up the phone, walk in the elevator, and I'm kind of trying to slow my walk up because I kind of want them to catch me on the elevator so I can be in that position, not knowing what I'm getting into again. But as I walk on, another person walks on, and he holds the elevator for them. So it was bound to happen. So I get on the elevator, and I'm sitting there, and they're talking. So I'm like, wow, like they're standing right there. This is power in one elevator. So they're talking. So I don't want to interrupt them. So they're talking. The guy that was on gets off, and it's just us three. And they're going to my floor. So we get to the fourth floor. I'm sitting there, and then we get there. Door opens, and I'm just like. And I walk out. I don't say I totally froze up rather. And but he was nice. He was a nice guy. I think in those later years, 2009, 2010, when he was going through the health stuff, this is just my personal kind of view. I felt like he was more in tune with the employees and just kind of opened up. When you would see him in the courtyard and in the quad and at lunch, he'd look at you, smile, he acknowledge you. Totally different than the fear that they indoctrinate within you. He was a super, of course, a brilliant guy. I recommend his biography that you guys, I don't know if you guys have read it or heard about it, but yeah, you guys should definitely check that out. What did you say?
It's job on Netflix now.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Absolutely, yeah. But yeah, great guy as you know. And that's me, doing my thing. Could have went to the NBA, but I said, nah, I'm just gonna focus on my tech career. But this is at Apple. This is during my second internship. They had a basketball court on campus, and we would play after work, every Tuesday and Thursday. And they were shooting this for some of their recruiting materials they wanted to roll out. They were doing a new kind of thing for the website and brochures that they would go to college campuses. So got to be immortalized, which was cool. That second summer I interned on the Logic Pro and GarageBand team. So that was awesome. And that was my first introduction to QA, doing quality assurance and testing. And it was cool because I'm a music head, I'm a producer and writer. So to be testing and working with the engineers that work on the software that I use for my art was awesome, and it was really, really cool. Another obstacle though, the end of that summer, they said they didn't have headcount to hire me full time. So end of that summer, I'm emailing teams, I'm emailing managers in the company like, yo, I've interned here, I've interned there, I know this, I know that, can you help me out? Finally got connected with the iOS manager and Apple, the iOS QA manager, and he hired me on full time after that summer, and that's how I got my start full time at Apple. And I started at Apple in 2011, and I was there for 2 years. So y'all remember this guy, Toy Story, Sid? I remember Sid. Yeah. So. This is how I kind of, my idea of QA was initially. I mean, you get the product, you get the product, from design and programmers and the coders, and then you just blow it up. You just go crazy on it, you test it, you break it. And I was attracted to that because in all of my coding experience in school, it was just so difficult for me to grasp. And when you're in school, you're doing projects that are kind of mundane. You're not really doing what you would really do in the real world. You're learning principles, but you're not doing anything super mind blowing. So it was hard for me to grasp. And QA was attractive to me because I had that background. I could speak the language that the developers were speaking, but I didn't have to write the code. I could approach things from a user experience standpoint as well. So in doing QA, I've kind of consider myself user experience kind of guy, and wanting to approach things and for the benefit of the user, even product experience, and just product direction and vision. You get the product and then you can analyze it from all these different angles. You're talking with designers, you're talking with developers, you're talking with product managers, you're talking with people from localization, and they're all approaching it from their specialties, and then you're approaching it from all of their specialties and then the user. So I think of QA as a great hub of positions to kind of be in technically, where you can exercise your technical prowess, you can exercise your user empathy, and it's cool, and you're not just, kicking stuff off and breaking it, you're also providing solutions and remedies. So that's how I got my start in QA at Apple and iOS, poster child of the company, which is awesome, and it was a great 2 years there. Oh man, the transition didn't work. I was gonna say I made this quote up and then took Steve Jobs' name on it, but I guess you guys know now. Anyway, yeah. So, Steve Jobs, Apple. You guys, you're looking at Macs right now. Apple to be the design kings, right? Like they get it right. They say, the stuff just works. That's their motto. It just works. And when I was there, working in iOS, like the poster child of the company, I'm looking at the design of everything, and sometimes I'm in awe, but sometimes I'm like, what are we doing? We're supposed to be like, the kings of kings, in design, and I'm like, I don't agree with any of this stuff we're doing. Sometimes. But the whole of Apple is they approach design in a way where, it's easy, it's simple, like if things just work, you don't have to think about it. If you have to think about it or ask questions, like they didn't get it right? That's their whole thing. And just a disclaimer, I'm not speaking for Apple or Twitter, this is my thoughts, my views are my own. But this quote, design is not just what it looks and feels like, design is how it works. And I think Steve is right in that, it's not just the aesthetic, it's not just the gradient, it's not just, the bells and whistles, but it speaks to even, developers and code. And I'll talk about this a little more later and talk about how I think you all, as graphic design students, should get a little bit into code and to, develop that skill, not necessarily to be a super crazy developer, but just to be able to empathize more with people in tech. And if you're going to design in tech, that you have that background and that footing to be able to, talk to people and move around and make yourself more marketable as well. So that you're not just like creating something, and being selfish, because I think design is not about you. Design is about your customer and the story you're trying to tell and the problem you're trying to solve. So this quote resonated with me, and I think it's relevant to what you guys are doing as well. So at Apple, you guys know about the idea of skeuomorphism, right? Do you? No. Okay. Cool.
I was just looking that up,
Okay.
but I didn't really get it. I didn't have time. It was like this morning before I came here.
Yeah.
I
So
ran across that term.
safe to say, people maybe heard the term before, maybe not, or maybe don't know what it is. All right. So between iOS, or before iOS 7, all of iOS had the theme of these skeuomorphic designs. And skeuomorphism is basically when, and don't quote me, you guys can Google it to get the finer definition, but it's when design mimics or is a replica of the realistic function of what you're trying to create. So this is the Contacts app on iPad. And as you can see, it looks like what? An address book, right? But it's on a tablet, and this actually doesn't work like a real address book, right? It doesn't turn, doesn't, do that. So, you think like, okay, that's cute, but Why mimic an address book on a tablet, when, I guess that connects you with the idea of what it is, but there's no real need for you to create this or design this like that, to make this, this leather stitching and that whole 9 kind of thing. But it was the way that Apple was doing things for a while. And you think like these design kings, and this is, we're in 21st century, 2010, 2011, 2012, and still doing things like this. This is before iOS 7, they were going this route, and it's just kind of like, it wasn't needed because one thing I'll talk about in the next example is, if you do things in a skeuomorphic way, you also bring the limitations of the real world thing you're trying to replicate. And I'll show that in the next example with the calendar app. So a skeuomorphic design, this is a calendar app on iPad, right? And this looks just like a real calendar. So it's cool. It's like, yeah, okay, I get exactly what this is. I know how to use it. And this does actually work like a real calendar. I can pinch my finger here, swipe, and then, you get the nice little ridges at the top to make it kind of replicate, oh, I'm tearing pages. Oh, that's cool. Oh, But, so you look at this and you say, what's the limitation? I can only view 1 month at a time. But I'm on a tablet. I'm on a touchscreen device. It's 2050 AD. Why do I need to be limited to viewing this, as 1 page at a time? Why? Why do I need that? You know what I mean? It's just kind of like, this is an example of the limitation in design. So I guess it's cute, and it helps you understand. I'm sure there were a lot of different reasons why they went this direction. But I think about this pivotal movement for Apple, and then in design, and what you guys will get into, you think about the story you're trying to tell, the problem you're trying to solve, and then also the platform or the medium that you're designing in. And you think, okay, hey, I'm on a tablet, how can I take advantage of this whole iOS ecosystem and what I'm designing? How are 5 and 6 year olds going to use this calendar app, or are they going to use it at all? If they are, what can they do with it? I guess they may connect the thing that they see on the wall, but when they get older, why should they be limited by this view of a calendar app, on this kind of a device? If that makes sense. Does that make any sense to you guys? Yeah. So this was an example. The examples I wanted to bring up because it just kind of speaks to solving problems in design and thinking about things holistically, and kind of thinking ahead and thinking about a lot of different things, not just the aesthetic, but also how it works and how it will work in the future. So I'm at Twitter now. Like Shaun said, I've been doing QA engineering and testing, software testing for the iOS and the Android app for the past year. But now I'm doing release engineering for iOS. So I basically shepherd the release on iOS from start to finish. You guys use Twitter? Anybody use Twitter? Okay, iPhone, Android. So on iOS, I'm at the beginning of the release, we're doing the planning. We're talking about the features that are going in, working with developers and the product managers, and then shepherding them and helping them, making sure they're committing their code in the right places, triaging the bugs that are coming in, till the finish line, actually submitting the app to the App Store. That's what I'm doing now. So I bring up this design, or these mocks, and I'm talking about design, and you think about what Twitter is. What's the best way to represent something that's real time or real time information? And I would say in a continuous stream, right? So we know Twitter to be that on mobile devices, a continuous stream of information. You keep scrolling, you pull to refresh, you get information, keeps piping in a timeline. But in iOS and Android, look at the design of how this is done, and you think about, okay, well, why doesn't Android have tabs like iOS? Why not? I mean, they're doing the same thing, right? It's the same app, they're trying to achieve the same purpose. Like, why do they have different mocks on different platforms? And one thing, the answer is, Android used to have tabs, but when Android moved to, I guess it's called a design, maybe ecosystem, called Pure Android, which is basically kind of having the native apps have this transition of swiping, and you can swipe on Android now. You get to these different screens. You can also tap, but that gesturing, introducing that move, we wanted to take advantage of that. So it now becomes not what does my app do, so I'm going to design it in the way my app works, or not solely that, but also what platform and what medium am I, designing for, and then how can users, let's say you're using, I don't know, Google Search or Google Plus, and they're using this gesture, and I do a quick switch in app in Twitter, how can I make it seem like they're not jumping into a whole different world? You know what I mean? If they're using that gesture, that pure Android design and ecosystem, why not take advantage of that? So it's a purely selfish kind of thing, or selfless, sorry. A selfless kind of thing, because as designers, as you guys get better and you get, super dope at creating mocks and all this stuff, you can't get caught up in, I'm just going to create the biggest, best, like crazy, futuristic, year 3000 mock is going to kill the game, blah, blah, blah. You get caught up in that skill and the beauty, but you lose sight of who you're designing for, and you lose sight of the customer, and you lose sight of the story you're trying to tell. You lose sight of the frictionless experience that you want your customer to have. So you're always thinking about, and I'm not a designer, but I work with a lot of them. You're always thinking about the customer and how to make things easier for them. And a lot of different ways that I've interacted with designers as a QA engineer, especially at Twitter because we're smaller, I often sit in design reviews and look at mocks before they manifest on the device. So, and I'm not necessarily telling them what to do because I'm not the design expert, but I get to give little nuggets and I say, okay, well, I'm thinking about this. Okay, now I tap this 100 times, my finger's gonna get tired if this button is here. Or I can say, well, maybe you wanna think about this because last time we did this like that and it didn't work out, stuff like that. I'm not, ripping apart mocks because I'm not the VP of design, but, in QA, you get to give that insight, especially if you're testing and you're trying to be that voice of the user. They have another, audience or another vantage point to look at and to get critique, from my view. And I'm taking into account, how this is working from the tech side, from the engineers. I'm taking in how this is working, from the product side and what they want. And I'm looking at it and how design, tells their story. And, you want to let designers be free to, tell their story because they're also thinking about the customer as well. So it's not like everybody's in la la land and I'm the only one like, hey guys, we gotta get serious. We're all trying to achieve the same goal. But like I said before, in QA, I've been at the hub of everyone's kind of view. So it's easier for me to have a bird's eye view and say, okay, just think about this, just think about that, what about this? Or, when you swipe this way, you get a glitch, or you swipe that way, and blah, 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 blah. I wanted to just kind of show this to say, we're the same app, same purpose, but you're on different platforms. You want to do different things to take advantage of the ecosystem that you're developing around or designing for. I came across this quote. This is not by a famous person. It's something I just kind of found on the web. It says it's easier to work design around code than it is to work code around design. I don't know. I'm not saying that I endorse it. I think there's some truth to it. I don't know if I would put that as a bumper sticker on my car. But and this arose from a discussion, a heated debate on why designers, web designers in particular at the time, didn't know basic HTML or CSS. And then this also kind of rose from the rebuttal of, well, what about developers? Like, why don't developers, pick up design skills? Why don't they know how to use Photoshop? Why don't they know how to use CS4 and all these different tools? And this was the quote. So, it's easier to work design around code than it is to work code around design. And I think about that, and you think about what code is doing, and there's design in code. I'll get into that later, but the code is purely functional at the functional level, So as long as my engine is running, I can put the outer layer of the shell in the car on top of that and, just make sure, the engine is pumping out the right fluids and going to the right places, and just, you're putting a wrapper around that. Versus, a lot of times, and I've seen in my experiences, maybe designs will get too out there, and then designer has, I guess, no kind of perspective on what's possible to implement, and then you get that disconnect of, hey, this is my design, this is my baby, this is what I'm clutching to, but you lose sight of, your other customer who is the developer, not necessarily the end user, but, your customer is the developer. So they have to look at it and say, okay, do this, okay, cool. And I talk to the developers on my team a lot, and I'm like, because I look at the designs that Twitter does and our mocks, and some of the stuff we have is like so beautiful, and I'm like, man, how do you, when you look at that, are you instantly intimidated? And seasoned developers, they can kind of look at something and they know like what's possible and what's not possible to implement. And the designers too. I think a lot of designers that I work with and that I've seen, they at least have basic HTML, CSS skills, so they just know and they can empathize with the developer more. So it's not necessarily about a war between designers and coders, but designers, I think, just from a purely like marketing standpoint and yourself and skills, you want to have that prowess, because you don't want to just be a guy that can just make posters. You want to be the guy that says, oh, and I have the prototype ready for you to see. Like, I'm not just stuck like, okay, like now I got to find somebody to do it. You're also the guy that's getting out the door. So I'm not saying that, I think in your perspective, you have to like pick up, HTML or CSS and be the man and be the master at it. But I think it is, this quote rings true a bit, and it is definitely a skill to want to pick up, so you're not paralyzed and not boxed in. But also be very, very good at design. You don't want to, just be a third or half good at a bunch of stuff. You at least want to be super, super good at one thing at least. So at least the developers can come to you and they say, no, it's fine. Like, I know you're the man at design. I know you're a woman. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be sexist or anything like that. But they know your expertise and they can empathize with you as well. So this quote rings true in a lot of different areas. So this is just a screenshot of what I was doing in my first internship at Apple. And believe it or not, these two blocks of code, this is CSS, they do the exact same thing. So I was presented with a lot of different CSS files, and my manager was like, okay, this stuff is getting too complex. Like, we gotta get this stuff to be at least readable. So I'm coming from the developer standpoint, and you look at the before, and the before was done by, believe it or not, a designer that had some coding experience. And after is what I had to kind of dig through and figure out what was going on and say, okay, like, this is doing the exact same thing. And I don't know if this looks foreign to you guys, but this is basically the OL and the LI and all that kind of stuff is just like list selectors and elements. And it's basically just trying to define in a web document, okay, if I'm in a ordered list and then I go to a bulleted list and then that list is indented some more and then this is here, then put these properties in it, put this color weight on it, put this font in it. That's basically just what it's saying. And it got to be so complex and so redundant that we assigned complexity values to the selectors themselves, and we had to measure, that was our way of measuring just how complex it was from a metric standpoint. So I had to dig in and do a little troubleshooting in QA and say, okay, if I take this out, does it look the same? No, it's not. Okay, put that back. And try to understand just what was going on. But for designers and learning code, you know, I would imagine that this designer maybe, you know, just picked up the basics and then just tried to implement it. But in code, like a coder doesn't know everything about design. I'm sure a designer doesn't know everything about code unless you master both. You know, they're just trying to get the job done. They're just trying to make it look good. They're not thinking about optimizing efficiency. They're not thinking about if this page loads, you know, how long it takes to load, you know. And then, you know, they're thinking about, I guess, themselves in this respect, sorry. But not thinking about those things where if I load this page, you know, over a number of times, you know, how many milliseconds is that like stacking on to my browsing experience as a user if I'm just doing this redundant kind of definition over and over and over and over again. And then after a while, we found that, you know, after reducing a lot of this stuff, things like, you know, load times and efficiency improved from eliminating a lot of that redundancy. And, you know, we got that down, fixed it up, and it was a great thing. But I came from the development background, so I kind of knew about that kind of stuff, and I was thinking about efficiency and, you know, timing, but the designer wasn't. But that's not a rip on designers. It's just kind of speaks to the limitations in that aspect too. So, you know, I think from a designer standpoint, if you learn the basics and you learn how to code, you can at least speak the language. You can empathize with developers and what they're doing. But, you know, I wouldn't necessarily suggest, you know, coding up a whole site, especially one that has to scale to millions and millions of users, if you're not thinking about other things like efficiency and stuff like that. So that was a good experience for me, and coming from the developer background and seeing how designers express themselves through code, and then also having to do a sort of code cleanup and a optimization kind of exercise. So that was a good experience. Does that make any sense? Yeah, cool.
And I have a quick question, please.
Yeah.
What do you think, as an engineer, what do you think about Muse as an alternative for design?
You said news?
Muse. Adobe Muse.
Muse.
Adobe Muse.
The graphic design. Adobe Muse.
Oh, the software.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. I'm not familiar with Muse.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with Muse. Is that?
Adobe CC
Is it? It's on par with like. So wait. There's Photoshop, right? Where's Muse?
Dreamweaver Muse basically it's a platform for you to go ahead and actually create your website.
Ah, okay.
The coding in the background as we go ahead and put pieces into
iWeb or something like that.
Okay, got you. So like kind of like a coding for dummies for designers, so to speak.
The interface is similar to InDesign.
Okay.
Where you're actually designing out and then it generates code for you.
Okay, yeah.
So it's almost like reverse engineering with Dreamweaver. You're
Yeah.
actually doing the opposite.
Right.
Microsoft has a tool like that too, as well. It's like a plug and play, almost like Scratch.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Like a plug and play code.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. I think tools like that are awesome. I'm not familiar with Muse, but I think those templates are awesome. Definitely it saves time.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Do you know Andre from Twitter? He used to work at Twitter.
Andre.
He worked at Adobe too, but the point is that he was saying that not to worry about new software, the latest software, but to be very good at one specific software.
Yeah.
Not get caught up with the latest thing out.
Yeah.
Do you have any perspective on that?
Absolutely. So, well, I'll speak to that, and I'll speak to that too. I kind of maybe combine them. I think those tools are great, especially saves time for you, because if you're at the point where you have a mock and you have the design, either you have it in your head or you have it out on paper or whatever. You don't necessarily want to crack open a book to look at how to do this stuff. Whatever makes your life easier. I'm for that. Take advantage of these tools. Like they're there. Like use them. Like I'm not like, oh well, you gotta earn your stripes and pay your dues and go learn. No. Like we're information age. Take advantage of it. I think it is also beneficial while you're plugging the pieces together to look at if they reveal the code, like to actually look at it and see how it's kind of implementing or what they're doing to implement it. I think that's awesome. But I think those tools are awesome if you can use them to your advantage. If they're not limiting you, like why not? I think that's awesome. And I actually talked to some designers too. I know, we use Photoshop and all the other Adobe Suite stuff. I'm not proficient with Photoshop at all. Actually, it's crazy. I think I should because it's 2014. You know what I'm saying? But who doesn't know how to use Photoshop? But me. But no, I think those tools are awesome. I think they're awesome too. With getting caught up in, I guess, trends or the fads or whatever, I think there's a happy medium. I think you definitely don't want to be left behind, but you also, you want to get comfortable and master what you're doing. It's what works for you. You don't want to necessarily, you go to a conference and they're like, oh, use the 2015 Ferrari F1000, whatever. This is the way, this is what the cool kids are using. And you feel like, man, I got to throw away everything I learned and use this. Now, take it with a grain of salt. If it's Johnny Ive saying that from Apple, then you may want to be like, all right, let me dip my foot in this. But, you don't want to be left behind, but you also don't want to get caught up in the wave. Learn, use what works for you. And then that's if you're like an individual designer or like a freelance or contractor or whatever. But of course, it's different if you're working at a corporate company. You want to use what the company's using. You don't want to, everybody using, Adobe Suite stuff and you're using, I don't know, whatever, Paint, Microsoft Paint, because that's my thing. I'm most comfortable with Paint. It's okay there, buddy. How did you get hired here? So you definitely want to take that into account. But to speak to, Shaun's question, I agree. You don't have to get caught in the wave of the latest trends and fads, because it's easy to do that too. You're in Silicon Valley, this place is just man, they could just get taxing on oh, this is the future. No, 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 really, this is the future. It's just oh my God, goodness gracious. You can really get caught up in that whirlwind of preachers and evangelists. But you want to get comfortable and master, get a pulse of what the industry is using. I think that's also important too. If you're you want to be a designer at a tech company, you want to talk to designers from tech companies to see what tools they're using, and then you get on that boat, and not say, I'm not gonna do that, I'm gonna do my own thing, and then they're gonna hire me. It's well, that's where you want to go, and you're not familiar with that. How is that gonna happen? So there's a lot of different things. You don't want to get caught up. You want to get a pulse of what people are using, and you want to use what works best for you. And also, there's different tools, do different things. So you also want to, if you want to do something that's rich in Flash, of course you want to use X tool. If you want to do something that's purely HTML5, you may want to use other tools. So know what works best for you and what tools do the right things. So yeah, it's also about what tools bring out the best product for whatever they're good at doing also, if that made any sense. Hope that was clear. So, yeah, right now I got a little bit of time left, but I just want to open it up to a little more informal conversation. If you guys have any questions about my experiences, design, code, life, Detroit, basketball. Thank you, thank you. Thank you.